Now, one of the things that is highly anticipated for the next chapter of One Piece, chapter 1053, is the bounty reveals that usually happens every arc. And so in this arc, there is no exception here. We are going to get bounties, especially considering that the newspapers are already in Wano, of course thanks to Apu. So we got the bounties a lot quicker than a lot of people thought. Then again, we did have a 7-day time skip, so I guess you could say that as well. But bounties are here, and I think it's time for me to give my bounties prediction for next chapter. Now again, as of making of this video, there is no spoilers, so be careful, because I think the chapter is going to come out a lot earlier than usual due to this chapter perhaps being very good. So spoilers will more than likely be everywhere once it gets leaked. But before we keep going, guys, I'd appreciate it if you dropped a like on this video. Definitely helps me push out more content. Subscribe if you're new here, and hit the bell if you want to get notified for future content on this channel. Now, first things first, I think we should start with the big hitters, which is Kid, Law, and Luffy. Starting with the individual who I think has the highest or will get the highest, and of course in this case Luffy is the very obvious answer here. Now with Luffy, there's a lot of things to take into account here, right? And again, given that this arc has Luffy's greatest achievement yet, also means that his bounty will have the greatest boost as well. Definitely way bigger of a boost than Whole Cake, right? Now mind you, that was a 1 bill boost in his bounty, and so I think a lot of people are expecting way higher for Post-Wano, and I think that's going to be the case for the most part. Now the easiest and the most simple way of going about things for bounties is obviously feats that were accomplished in this arc, as well as other little details that could add on to the bounty as well. In Luffy's case, there's actually one thing that kind of separates him from everyone else, and I'll elaborate more on that. But first things first, feats, right? And again, the most obvious answer at this point is him being responsible for defeating Kaido. That is going to be the biggest contributor to his bounty. Luffy defeated a Yonko, which is unprecedented in terms of the history of the One Piece world, because again, these Yonkos have ruled over the oceans for decades and solidified themselves even more throughout the course of that period. And so toppling one of these guys is a crazy accomplishment. Adding on to the fact that Kaido is probably the most notorious out of the Yonko, having the highest bounty. So Luffy defeating the person with the highest bounty here also means a lot. Now, apart from feats, there's also something that separates him from the other character, and this is tied to Luffy's devil fruit. With Luffy's fruit being the sun god devil fruit, I think this will add an extra increase to his bounty. Now, why? Because this devil fruit has lore behind it, one that the government is extremely terrified of, right? Because from what has been hinted, it seems like this devil fruit is Joy Boy's devil fruit, and so having that stigma attached to Luffy's fruit, I think definitely deserves an extra increase to his bounty, because this is something that the world government is extremely terrified of. So it makes sense that they would add more to his bounty, not only just because he defeated the Yonko, but because he also has this extremely powerful devil fruit that once played a role in history. And this is something the government is very aware of, because they did mention that Nika has made a reappearance in the world. So they are aware that Luffy has manifested this ability into reality. So that's something that they have to factor in. So we have feats, that's defeating Kaido. We have lore, that being Luffy's devil fruit and what it means to the world government. And finally, Luffy being the leader in all of it. Even though the alliance between Luffy and Law was mutual, it could also be misconstrued as Law being under Luffy, which would technically make Luffy the organizer of all of them, including the non-existent alliance with Kid as well. And this was something that we saw in Whole Cake Island, in which Luffy was regarded as the mastermind behind everything that transpired in Whole Cake, even though we know that the alliance was mutual on both sides, right? And so Luffy being the ringleader of all of these guys coming together, that definitely adds an increase to his bounty as well. At least that's what I personally think. And so I think those three things are going to be the biggest contributor of Luffy's next bounty. So let's go over it again. First one being feats, responsible for defeating Kaido. Second being lore, his devil fruit being a very powerful one and one that is attached to more than likely Joy Boy. And the third one, him being the leader that made all this possible. And so that finally brings me to Luffy's bounty, 4 billion berries. Now initially I used to think that it would be 5 bill, but again, we have to realize that it took a culmination of several different individuals to make this happen. Unlike what happened in Whole Cake, where it was just the Straw Hats, this consists of the efforts of multiple crews. And so I think that plays a part as to why it's not going to be 5 bill. So again, taking everything into account, I think Luffy's bounty post Wano will be 4 billion on the mark. arc. Now, moving on to Kid. Now, Kid, there isn't a lot to be said here just because, again, Luffy's case is a bit special. There's several things attached to what I think his bounty increase will be linked to. And so everyone from here on out will have bounties only linked to feet, with the exception of Nico Robin, because it seems like there's a huge focus on her currently in the story, but I'll talk more on that later on. But with Kid, we know that he's one of the individuals responsible for taking down Big Mom, and so his bounty is sort of correlated with Law's bounty as well, since they are both responsible for taking down Big Mom. So it wasn't a 1v1 situation like it was with Luffy. In this case, it was a 2v1 versus Big Mom. But regardless, defeating a Yonko level character with only 2 individuals is extremely impressive, and this would tell the government that these 2 individuals are no joke, and they essentially have a power level in which if both of them do combine, they are capable of taking down a Yonko. And so their bounty increase will be in relation to their strength and capabilities as a fighter. And so with Kid, I think his bounty reveal is going to be 2.8 billion, which is a massive boost from his previous bounty, as Kid's previous bounty was about 475, and so he essentially got a 2 billion bounty boost from this. And I think it's definitely deserved because, again, him and Law are responsible for taking down Big Mom, regardless of the asterisk involved in the fight, or if you don't think they're Yonko level. What matters to them is what actually happened in the fight. And in the fight between Big Mom versus Kid and Law were the victors, and that's all the world government need. And so I think 2.8 billion is reasonable for Kid. Now, moving on to Law, his story pretty much follows the same scheme as Kid, but he's also sort of attached to Luffy due to the fact that the alliance created between them was something that happened a while ago. So perhaps that might give him a minor boost, but nothing substantial. And so with Law, I think his bounty reveal is going to be 2.5 bill. Again, defeating a Yonko in a 2v1 is extremely impressive, because at this point moving forward, the only people that would be able to beat these guys would essentially be admirals or other Yonkos. And so with Kid and Law, they proved themselves to be extremely powerful in this arc and powerful enough to topple a Yonko. And so I think these bounties are reasonable, or anything in the 2 bill spectrum or range. Now, moving on to the other Straw Hat crew member. First off, we're going to start with Zoro. Now, I think Zoro's bounty is going to be 1.5 bill, essentially what Luffy's previous bounty was, and I think it's definitely justified based on what he was able to accomplish in this arc. Now, you're not going to look at the fact that he scarred Kaido or anything, but more so at the individual he defeated, which was King. And King, we know, had a bounty of 1.39 bill, which is very high. And by the way, this was revealed in a Vivre card, I believe, so we didn't actually get that in the actual story. But I think it makes sense for Zoro's bounty to surpass the person that he fought. Kind of a similar situation as to what happened in Whole Cake Island to Luffy, right? I think something similar is going to happen here as well. We do also have to take into account that he is the vice captain of the crew and essentially the right-hand man to the person who defeated Kaido. And again, we do know that the Straw Hats do get a boost just by being affiliated to Luffy. So I think 1.5 bill definitely seems very reasonable for Zoro. It's been a while since Zoro has had a bounty increase, and so I think his next bounty increase should be a very large one. Now, moving on to Sanji, and again, just like Zoro, Sanji is responsible for defeating a commander of the Beast Pirates and the second strongest commander at that, Queen. And we know that Queen had a bounty of 1.3 bill. And again, I think the same situation might happen here as well, where Sanji is going to get a bounty that is higher than the person that he defeated. In this case, Queen having a bounty of 1.3 bill. And we do have to remember that Oda has a thing with Zoro and Sanji in which he likes their bounties to be very close to each other. And so I think it makes sense for Sanji's next bounty to be very close to Zoro's next bounty. And so with Sanji, I think his next bounty is going to be 1.35 bill. Again, his accomplishments in this arc was pretty crazy, and so I think a bounty in the billions is definitely deserved for Sanji and Zoro. And again, just by being affiliated with the person who defeated Kaido, he would also get a slight increase as well on top of that. Now, moving on to Jinbe. Now, Jinbe, he is responsible for defeating Who's Who. Now, Who's Who is easily the strongest character behind the Calamities, and I think Jinbe was definitely the way stronger person here, and his fight between Who's Who was definitely a wash on Jinbe's side, in which Jinbe was just so much more dominant in that battle, and it didn't really display Jinbe's full strength, right? Because I think Jinbe for the most part mid-diffed Who's Who. And given that they have similar bounties, Jinbe having 438 mil versus Who's Who has 546, I don't think the increase is going to be necessarily that, but I think Jinbe's bounty most definitely overcomes that of Who's Who. And so in this case, I think Jinbe gets a bounty of 700 mil based on his actions on Onigashima and being the individual who defeated the strongest Flying Six. And again, just like the others, he's also going to get a slight increase by being affiliated with the Straw Hats, in this case Luffy in particular, just because Luffy was responsible for defeating Kaido. So I think a 700 mil bounty here is definitely deserved. Now, I do think that Jinbe more than likely should have fought Jack, but again, just because of the narrative value with Jack fighting the Minx in Oneko specifically, that was kind of botched, and you know, Jinbe had someone way lower than him in strength, and I most definitely think that Jinbe would have beat Jack. Next we have Nico Robin, and I have Nico Robin's bounty at 500 mil. Now I have this for two reasons in particular. First being feats, and second being a sudden focus on her having the potential to read poneglyphs as of recently. Even though it should have been a thing for the entirety of the story, it seems like there's a huge focus on her at this point in time. Now when it comes to feats, we know that she is responsible for defeating Black Maria, who had the second highest bounty amongst the Flying Six at 480 mil. And so Robin defeating someone who had a way higher bounty than her, I think she definitely deserves an increase here, and a major one at that. But we also have to take into account that there seems to be a focus on her at this point in time as well. She was mentioned earlier when Kaido and Big Mom was at the rooftop, as she was one of the priorities for capture. And then we also have the world government seemingly chasing her as well, and actively right now. And so I think both of these things combine and culminate in her bounty going into the 500s. In this case, I think her bounty is going to be 500 mil. Technically, it should be more given that she has the capability of reading the poneglyph, but for some reason, it seems like the world government seems to lowball her as a way to deter people from looking into a possible high bounty. Because if people saw her bounty being very high for some reason, they're going to question that. And so they're keeping her bounty relatively low in terms of her potential to not give people awareness of what she's truly capable of. Now, moving on to Brook, we know that Brook for the most part was working with Robin in her fight against Black Maria, but in terms of what Brook did in this arc, there was nothing really notable except for dealing with fodders and helping in specific situations, but he didn't really fight anyone notable or did anything that was substantial, right? And so with Brook, I think his bounty goes to 300 mil. Again, just by being associated with Luffy in this arc, people who didn't necessarily do anything will get a bounty boost as well. And I think Oda had him chill in this arc just because of what he did in Whole Cake Island, where he was essentially the MVP. And so with Brook, I think his bounty increase is just his association with Luffy and being a part of his crew. And Usopp sort of follows a very similar scheme as well, where he didn't really do anything notable in this arc as well, right? Even though it seemed like Page 1 was going to be the person that he fights, we know that Page 1 was ultimately taken out by Big Mom, so that fight was ended short, and Usopp didn't really do anything there. In fact, Usopp was almost non-existent in this arc in terms of feats, right? Apart from feeding the Kibidango to the Beast Pirates, again, nothing substantial with Usopp in this arc. And so I think his bounty goes up to 350 mil. And again, just like with every other Straw Hat, his bounty increase would be based on his association to Luffy. So that's pretty much it for Usopp. And I think for the most part, Oda is setting up something special for Usopp in Elbaf, so that's why we didn't really get a lot of him in this arc. And so I think 350 mil is definitely deserved here. Next we have Nami. Now Nami is a bit complicated due to her feats having different variables, just because when it comes to her fight against Ulti, there was a lot of in-betweens, her getting interrupted. For the most part, Nami was essentially running away from the fight. And we know that Big Mom dealt a lot of damage to Ulti before Nami actually knocked her out. But again, she is responsible for taking out Ulti, so something is definitely deserved there. But a lot of it was also in conjunction with Usopp, so I wouldn't necessarily call it a fair 1v1 like the other fights with the Straw Hats. And so with Nami, I think her bounty is 200 mil. Again, she didn't really do anything substantial in this arc. Her fight against Ulti was sort of mostly Big Mom, who dealt a lot of damage there, and so I think she doesn't totally deserve credit for beating Ulti, but she was responsible for taking her out. And again, just by like with the other Straw Hats, by association to Luffy, she also gets a slight increase, and so I think 200 mil for Nami is pretty fair. And finally, we come to Frank. Now, unlike Usopp and Nami, Frankie actually had a 1v1 against a Flying 6 and essentially defeated them without help. In this case, his battle was against Sasaki, who had a bounty of 472 mil. And in Frankie's battle, he was very dominant against Sasaki, and so I think Frankie's new bounty is going to be 400 mil. Again, we have to remember that Frankie didn't really have a lot of bounty increases in the series. I think he's only had one. He's currently at 94, and so I think this being a 300 mil boost is reasonable, and him finally hitting that 400 mil bounty mark I think makes a lot of sense. And again, just like the others, just being associated with Luffy increases his bounty slightly. But what are your predictions for the Straw Hats bounties and that of Kid, Law, and Luffy? Comment down below what you guys think. As usual, I would appreciate it if you dropped a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, hit the bell if you want to get notified for future content. You can follow me on Twitter at Ferrospace, but it is Ferro, and I will see you folks later. Peace.